Hey, good morning to everybody. Happy Wednesday. It's Daryl here. It's bright and freaking early, man. It's 3 a.m. here in Connecticut on the East Coast. Where to start with this video? This is one of those videos where I really feel the urge to record this. I just got back from a 3.5 mile walk around town, and I was thinking about recording this. And it's one of those videos I record, and I honestly I tell myself, I'm not sure if I'm going to download it or not. Whenever I do a video like this, I feel like it's one of the most important videos I do, but at the same time, I have a hard time not getting it downloaded on YouTube, but getting it monetized. So no matter what, a lot of times it gets what I call yellow lighted. Let me say this right off the bat, first and foremost. The reason I'm doing this video is because I'm going to be turning 59 in a couple weeks. I'm approaching 60 years old, and I start thinking about what is my legacy. I never had kids. I never got married. So what good did I do in the world? What mark did I leave? What did I help anybody? Did I change anybody's life? And I really get the feeling. I've been clean and sober for over 18 years. I was using heroin, coke, pills, drinking for over two decades, and I really get the feeling the reason I'm still here is to help other people. That's the reason I'm doing this video. Is every time I do a video and I talk about this, you hear about sexual abuse, but rarely do you hear guys coming forward and talking about it. And that's why I'm talking about it. Every time I do a video, every time I'll get maybe at least a half dozen comments from guys saying, "Thank you so much for having the balls to talk about this. Same thing happened to me." So I know there's a lot of people, a lot of guys out there that had this happen to them when they were younger. And as I was out on my walk this morning, this is how it started. On Facebook this morning, I was thinking about my legacy and everything. And I posted on Facebook about the degree of addiction that I had, having done crack and coke and for 2 decades and all that. And after I wrote that, I looked at it and I wondered if what had happened to me, if it had any bearing on me, on my addictive behavior, on my addiction, on me going and using drugs, being abused. Like I said, the reason I'm doing this video is hopefully to touch somebody else, to encourage, to share what I've learned. Because it damaged me. It damaged me way worse than I ever imagined. Here's the thing too that I realize now as I'm getting older. It wasn't the physical acts that were the worst part of it. The worst part of it was the lying and the leading a separate life. Let me say this right at the beginning here. My father passed away from malignant brain cancer when I was 9 years old. He was a hardworking guy. He was the head ranger at a state park here in Connecticut. We lived in the state park. My father ran the state park, head ranger, and he got brain cancer in 1975, and within a couple of months he died. He was gone, and I was the man of the family. Within a few years, my mother started dating again. And let me say this right off the bat too. My mother had she's a great woman, and my relationship has been repaired. Me and her go out to coffee, or I take her out to eat for breakfast at least once a week, and we have a great relationship now. I didn't tell her about this until I was probably about 35 years old. And, the shock and the hurt, it bothers me how much it hurt her. My little sister found out about it, and she went to this guy's house and was going to take him out. Seriously. My mother had no inkling of any of this. It just speaks to how much of a predator, a liar that this guy was. So it was a policeman, not just a policeman, but an older policeman. My mom was in her 30s. This guy was about 50 years old. He was a big, strong Irish cop, high up in the police force, been there for years. He had a lot of ribbons for valor and accommodations and all that stuff. So he was a much respected police officer in the police force. This is how my mother met him. We lived out in the woods, like I said, at a state park, and my father had died. So was my mother, the widow, and her two little kids. So the police would come and do checks on us to make sure we were okay. And one of these guys ended up dating my mother, and he turned out to be a predator, and he abused me for years. Like I said, and I didn't tell my mother about this until I was 35 years old. Yeah, so he was the last person you'd expect. You know, I see a lot of stuff, like right-wing stuff about drag, people in drag, and these library things, you know, reading books in libraries. And I hear them call these people groomers, and it infuriates me, because I'll tell you what a real groomer, what grooming really looks like, because it happened to me. This guy wasn't any drag queen or anything like that. He was a respected cop that you would have never suspected in a million years. And that's part of the reason too, that even after he forced me, and it started at the beginning, I got the feeling that he told me that nobody would believe me. You know, this started, I was probably about 11 years old. And it lasted until I was over 15 years old. And I'm hesitant to say that, because I still almost feel guilty. You know, oh my God, you were like, I feel guilty. Like, because it lasted until I was 15 years old. I got physically strong enough where I ended up drawing a line. He came in my bedroom one time after 4 or 5 years of doing this to me. And my mother was out of the house or whatever. And I've done other videos saying it was a baseball bat, but it was actually a pair of nunchucks. You know, I had a pair of nunchucks, and I was really good, proficient at using them. You know, I'd gotten in actual fights, gang fights with these nunchucks, and I was good at using them. And he came in my bedroom, and he had that smile, that smirk on his face, like he was gonna touch me. And like I said, I was 15, and this was the last time. And I told him, stay away from me. I told him, this fucking ends right now. And the worst thing in the world is he laughed. He laughed at me. And he started to come walk towards me, and I just cocked back, and I swung down. He brought his arm up like this, and it just cracked him right in the forearm. And I saw a stunned look on his face, and he drops down. That's where I should have just kept hitting him. And I stopped, and he looked back up at me and just chuckled. I still, man, I know what it feels like to want to actually take somebody's life, because that's how I felt right at that moment. Part of me still feels guilty, you know, that I feel like I should have stopped this, you know, even though it started when I was 11 years old. The worst part of this, let me say this first of all too, the acts, what he did, what happened, everything. The worst things you could imagine, the worst acts you could picture, he did to me. Like I said, at first it was forced. Then I felt like I was complicit. I felt like it was partly somehow it was my fault. And the worst part of it wasn't the physical acts, but the worst part of it was the lying. You know, because every time I saw my mother, every time I looked at my mother in the face, I was keeping this secret. And this is what killed me. This is, if anything led me to use drugs, it was that. It was the lying. He was a master manipulator and predator. The very first time he grabbed me when I was 11 years old, my mother was in the house. She was down in the basement doing laundry. I was sitting on the couch watching TV, kind of with my feet down the couch, sitting at the end, watching TV with an Afghan blanket over me. And he walked in. My mom's downstairs. I could hear her down in the basement doing laundry. I'm 11 years old. And he sits at the end of the couch. And right away, I feel uncomfortable. I never liked this guy. I never trusted him right from the very beginning. And he reaches over. He puts his hands. He looks over. And I'm trying to just ignore him and watch TV. And he slips his hand under the Afghan. And up, and he grabs me. And he says, how's the stem of your stinger, Daryl? No, he didn't say Daryl. He said, how's the stem of your stinger? And he had this sick grin on his face. So that was the first time. And my mother was right in the next room. That's how, like I said, this guy was a cop, a 50-year-old cop. And that's when it started. And it just got so much worse. It happened hundreds of times. By the time I was 12, 13, by the time I was 14, he would call me up. He would call up and hang up. And my mother would be like, who? I wonder who's doing that. Who's this sick person calling our house? Because she would answer the phone and the person would hang up, and it was him. And I felt terrible. I had this secret, and like I said, I felt this was my fault. I felt guilty about this. Here's the thing too, when you're younger like that, especially being a male, your body responds. I realize this now. Your body responds to being physically touched, and that part of me felt terrible. It felt guilty. I felt like I was enjoying this, even though, because like I said, your body responds to being touched, even on the couch that day. My body got excited, and I felt so guilty about that. Looking back now, I understand. That's a physical aspect of my body responding. It has nothing to do with me liking it or condoning it or anything like that. And I felt terrible about that. That's one of the reasons that it just, every time it happened, I felt worse and more guilty and more complicit. Here's something I've never talked about. I'm going to have to do several videos talking about this. When I was 13 years old, I lost my virginity, and this is how it happened. Like I said, he groomed me, and my friends all thought he was a great guy, the cop and everything, and he would give me Playboys and penthouses, and he would slip me like condoms, even though I hadn't had any intercourse yet. I tell my friends, and he's a great guy. He gives you these magazines, and he's a guy's guy, he's your buddy. And he offered to get me laid. My mother was working nights. Like I said, I was 13. My mother was working nights at a convalarium. She was a nurse's aide. She would leave the house at 11. I would watch my little sister all night. And it was New Year's Eve, 1981, I think it was. No, 1980, 1979. I can't even remember, 1979. And I had a back door to my room. And it was right before midnight, New Year's Eve. And he brought this woman over. And I opened up the door, and she's all drunk. She's wearing a fur coat and nothing underneath. I had been on the phone with my friend because my friends knew this. My friends didn't know what he was doing to me. My friends didn't know how he was abusing me, that aspect of it. But I told them about this. I told them he's going to get me laid. He's going to bring a woman over, 13 years old. And she was about 35. And obviously, looking back, she was a pro. She was a pro. That's how I lost my virginity. She was hammered. She comes in my bedroom and gets undressed and everything. And I ended up getting on her, going at it. He sat in the corner of the room and watched the whole thing. Yeah, that's how I lost my virginity at 13 years old. It got to the point where he was actually paying me, because as I hit 13 and 14 and 15, he knew I was going to respond physically. I was going to fight him off. I was going to go after him one of these times, and he started offering me money. When it first started, I think I was 12 years old with the money, and he would offer me a roll of quarters, like $10 in quarters, every time he serviced me. That was his thing, servicing me. And he'd say, here's some $10 for the Asteroids, because we played Asteroids back then. There's $10 for the Asteroids machine. And at that age, I was looking at myself like a prostitute. At 12 years old, that's what I considered myself. Not just a prostitute, but a male prostitute. These are things I never told anybody. And this ate me up inside, keeping this secret for all these years. I'm 59 years old, and I'm just talking, you guys are hearing some of this for the very first time anybody's ever heard this. Like I said, and I realize now, it wasn't even the acts that were the worst. It was the lying and leading this separate life and blaming myself and, thinking that I was guilty, that somehow I was guilty in all this. Like I felt like I was just as guilty as he was. Like I said, because how my body responded to it, and how I took money for it and how I never told, I kept it a secret. I remember him telling me, he's like, I'm a policeman, Daryl, and you're a 14-year-old kid who messes around, skips school, and smokes pot. He goes, who do you think anybody's going to believe if you tell? He actually said that to me. The worst thing he said to me, he hinted around about my little sister. You know, looking back, I don't think he would ever touch her now, but back then I thought he would. I thought if I refused him, then he would go to my little sister, and then I would have to kill him. So a lot of times I think that was in the back of my mind when he would call up on the phone and he'd say, meet me down, you know, meet me here, meet me there, you know, and he'd take me back to his house, service me. I'd lay on the bed, he'd give me a magazine, I'd put it in front of me because I couldn't watch him do this. And I'd look through the magazine and just pretend it was a woman, a girl doing this to me. And he'd be down there servicing me. I'd finish. That's what he wanted. That's what excited him. And then he'd give me a roll of quarters and send me on my way. Yeah, so it's taken me all this time to try to repair the damage that this did to me for those 4 years of my young life. Here's the thing. I really want to, if this has happened to you, you know that you are a victim, you know, that you are not guilty of anything. That's the thing I want to share with you guys most of all. I'll talk more about this because there's so much more you guys just wouldn't believe. Recovery is possible. I've been clean and sober for over 18 years now, completely clean and sober since October 23rd of 2006. You guys have a good Wednesday.